to Our Environment, Matter of Concern. I'm your host, Mary Ridings-Ward, and my guest today is Alicia Sharma, Executive Director of Rivers Alliance of Connecticut. Yes, today's topic is water. First, before we turn to my guest, have you heard about the road salt controversy in Connecticut? According to an article in the CT Mirror, for several years now, truckers are concerned about road salt corroding their vehicles. So you can forget about collecting tolls. They won't want to drive through our state much longer. And because of road salt, more than 322,000 private well owners in Connecticut have a gripe. Reports are mounting, more than 190 so far, of wells that have corrosion from road salt. One Connecticut resident has replaced her water heater 4 times in 8 years, and now has been informed her water is undrinkable due to high levels of sodium chloride. According to an NBC Connecticut news article, sodium chloride from the mixture used to pre-treat roadways before a snowfall is creeping into wells, making the water undrinkable. But truckers and well owners are not the only ones complaining. Now, folks, one of our favorite indicator species, frogs, are complaining also. The newest frog complaint is extreme inflammation causing their bodies to swell. However, frog complaints about road salt go back to at least 2016, when Yale scientists discovered female frogs may be mutating into males, potentially endangering future populations. According to research from Yale University and Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, the sodium chloride in road salt may have a masculinizing effect on would-be female frogs during their development. So here's the controversy. How do road and parking lot maintenance crews keep icy, wintry pavement safe for driving and walking and use less salt? Well, at the end of today's show, I'm going to share with you actions being taken to curb salt use in road and parking lot de-icing, and how you can participate as a citizen scientist in collecting salt data. Now let me introduce my guest, Alicia Sharma, Executive Director of Rivers Alliance of Connecticut. And as the Director of Rivers Alliance of Connecticut, Alicia, your job is to work to protect all the waters of Connecticut, to promote and support good water policies statewide, including providing assistance to environmental groups, businesses, and individuals who seek to improve the quality of local waters. You fit naturally into this work as a proven advocate of water as a public trust. And your depth of public policy experience includes serving on the Connecticut Council of Environmental Quality, the advisory board of the Connecticut Institute of Water Resources, and as the co-chair of the Water Planning Council Advisory Group. I thank you so much for all the work that you have done for Connecticut's waters to restore them and protect them. Today, Alicia, let's talk about some currently proposed Connecticut legislation that is aimed to curb problems plaguing our beautiful Connecticut waters. You've talked to me about the aquatic invasive species, and that Connecticut needs a centralized plan for managing aquatic invasive species that take over ponds and lakes and rivers. And I guess many of these problem species travel easily throughout the state and the country. Would you describe some of these species and tell us about the current aquatic invasive species legislation, how it will help Connecticut?
Sure. So I'll start out just by introducing the bill, which is 5143, which has had a public hearing in the Environment Committee. What it does is it establishes an Office of Aquatic Invasive Species within the Agricultural Experiment Station. And directs them to work with various groups. And this is a very good start. This bill is definitely worth promoting. And if we can go to the next slide, I want to talk about one of the species that really prompted our legislators to introduce this bill, because there is a pretty significant problem in the Connecticut River with something called hydrilla. Hydrilla is an extremely aggressive, and this particular species of hydrilla is very aggressive. It has hemmed in business or municipal docks and marinas all up and down the Connecticut River. And if you can move to the next slide, I'll show you the dense mats that it forms. So you cannot get a boat in and out of here. You can't fish where these dense mats are. So it impedes recreation. But it also, when it dies back, and because it's so dense, it can actually cause harmful algal blooms. So, an increase in cyanobacteria. So that's another problem. The other aquatic invasive of concern is European water chestnut. And if you can move to the next slide, I can show you what this looks like. It's actually much prettier than hydrilla. It looks lovely. It sits on the top of the water. It's a rosette. And as you can see, it also produces these dense mats that make recreation almost impossible. And if you look at that black thing there in the middle, it's about the size of a quarter, and it's spiky. It'll pop a tire. It's really those you don't want to step on those without shoes on. And if you can move to the next slide, I can show you. This is hydrilla and European water chestnut together, and the hydrilla is actually outcompeting the water chestnut. So let's discuss the bill just a little bit more, because I want to talk a little bit about where we're at, and you can take the slide down now.
Perfect.
So I want to talk about the issues we're having right now in Connecticut with addressing aquatic invasive species. So we don't have a coordinated effort here in Connecticut at the state level right now. Back in 2015, DEP eliminated a position they shared with UConn to do some of this coordination. That is desperately needed, because there are a lot of groups working on this. And the Agricultural Experiment Station, they do amazing work on research, but they're not necessarily the group to do the coordination. So there actually exists an invasive species council at the state level that is statutorily directed to do some of the work that they talk about in this bill. And that group hasn't really met in the last 2 years. So that group has all of the right people in the same room to be able to address emerging threats like hydrilla, to figure out how we can do better coordination at the state level on things like trappa, because you have a lot of volunteer groups working on trappa and tans. The other issue is that we did institute a stamp for motorboats to try to help pay for some of our work on aquatic invasives. That money has done great work in funding local groups addressing the invasives in their own waters, but there's not enough to go around for education and for management of things like hydrilla. Hydrilla is going to cost millions of dollars to manage in the Connecticut River. It's going to cost quite a bit just to figure out how to manage it, because it is a species it's only found in Asia outside of the Connecticut River. So there's a lot we need to learn about it.
Wow.
So what needs to happen is, I think that it would be helpful to direct a lot of this work at the Invasive Plants Council. We also need to find better ways to fund this work through the education for the boating community, for management, and to establish this in the Agricultural Experiment Station, we need more funding. They need more funding.
That's a great peek, Alicia, into the invasive species and some important legislation that's in front of the state legislature right now. Thanks for talking about that. let's take a couple minutes to talk about pesticides and some legislation that's before the Connecticut State Legislature on pesticides.
Sure. If we could move to our first slide on pesticides. So SB 120 it restricts the use of I always get this word wrong. Chlorpyrifos. I know I'm saying this wrong. I apologize. On golf courses and neonicotinoids for non-agricultural use.
Well, we've heard a lot about neonicotinoids.
We have heard a lot about neonicotinoids. So this bill is really an important bill. And what restricted use means, it means that the general public cannot use this. Only permitted applicators can use that. So it takes these chemicals out of public use. They can't use it in their backyards, because overuse happens in people's backyards. The other bill that is in the legislature this session is SB 116. If we can move to that slide. It prohibits the blanket use of pesticide applications near lakes and ponds which fail to enable the public. This is essentially a notification bill. So when pesticides are being used in lakes and ponds, they have to be used within a certain time. Now, there are some issues with this bill because I did hear some applicators talking about this and narrowing it down to a really small window and saying, I'm going to do it on this day, isn't always possible because you have to have the right conditions to apply a pesticide. So what could happen if the bill goes forward in this particular form is that applicators may just do it because they're supposed to do it on that day. It may not be the best conditions. So you want to use pesticide applications as sparingly as possible. And you want it to be effective.
Well, that's
and if it's not effective, then
right, because windy conditions are not when you want to spray pesticides. So you're bringing up a really good point about the legislative process itself,
right?
How complicated it can be. And I know a lot of these bills are presented 2 and 3 sessions consecutively before they actually pass. And a lot of what you do is inform and educate, the decision makers, the legislators. So thank you so much for all of that work that you do.
Sure.
And we know that we have to continue talking to legislators and requesting different bills because pesticides greatly affect human health.
They do. There's plenty of evidence. There's also a lot of evidence of how they impact our environment. They disrupt ecosystems. There's a lot of evidence as to how neonics impact our bee populations,
right? Which
is extremely important. And the bill for neonics and chlorpyrifos, the one that I have a hard time saying, really what it's doing is it's kind of the Great American Lawn is not good for water quality and it's not good for our environment. So it's really just taking those uses out of maintaining that Great American Lawn. And we really need to look beyond, or at least think differently about our lawns and how we manage them if we want to have bees and all of the bugs that feed our fish in our rivers and streams.
Right.
So it's really important that we think beyond that.
Right. Nature is just amazing how she takes care of so many needs, and yet nature is very complicated. Very complicated.
Very complicated.
And so we know that we need all the creatures to create a human habitat that is truly healthy.
That's true.
And I think that's what we're all after, is a really healthy human habitat. But turf grass is not necessarily the best way to take care of our human habitat. It looks pretty, But there are so many ornamental shrubs in different ways, so I hope that we can continue educating people about how to have a gorgeous yard without all of the turf grass.
For sure.
So those are a couple bills on pesticides, and there's also something that is really important to me, the road salt. You know, Connecticut lacks laws to curb chloride in our waterways. So we don't really know what's out there. We have some idea, and you'll tell us a little bit about that when we get to that slide. But it's been very problematic for homeowners and the many businesses in Connecticut that use well water.
Yes, it has, for sure.
And excess chloride corrodes the water systems. And the salt doesn't get trapped easily by soil. So it's moving quite a bit throughout our natural system. So tell us a little bit about the road salt.
Sure. So SB 240 is another variation of a bill that would require DEP to help UConn, who has done a tremendous amount of work on road salts and investigating how to reduce those road salts while still having safe roads and safe sidewalks. So they came up along with another organization with this program called Green Snow Pro. And through Green Snow Pro, UConn has helped to train several municipalities. And if you can go to the next slide, it'll show all of the municipalities that have been provided training here in Connecticut. However, you can see, you know, that's probably maybe about half, but that's only municipalities. So that doesn't cover your private applicators and anyone outside of your DPWs. So this bill requires DEP and DOT to sort of chip in and expand this program to make sure that it's getting out there to all of our municipalities, all of our private applicators, which is going to have more of a benefit because, you know, our watersheds, everything runs off to, you know, our backyard streams, which ends up in, you know, our bigger rivers. And it's really important that we get a handle on this, not only for public health, but also for our environment. So as you can see from in the next slide, that road salt in the US has increased. And interestingly enough, I was talking to someone who had worked for DEP, and it was actually kind of a relief when they got rid of sand because they weren't putting the silt in the water. They had no idea how the switch to salt was going to impact our aquatic environment. And the USGS, and if you can move to the next slide, you can see USGS has done a tremendous amount of work studying chlorides and salts in our waterways. And they have this really fantastic chloride mapper that's available on their website. And if we go to the next slide, you can see data on chlorides in the Pequovic River. And I know Mary's going to talk a little bit about the program that PRWA has for that. But it's, and if we could talk about this just for a few more minutes, I think we have a few more minutes.
We do.
Just to talk about, you know, again, it's a human health issue. It makes its way into private wells, but it's also an ecological issue because our frogs, as you mentioned earlier, Southern Connecticut State University just came out with that study. Frogs are impacted. The no-see-ums that are important to our environment, like certain zooplankton, they're impacted by road salts.
Okay.
Those zooplankton eat algae and help keep algae blooms under control. So we don't realize the problems we're creating as we're trying to solve another problem. And if we can find, you know, a balance between, you know, utilizing utilizing the salts, but still protecting our environment and public health. And this bill helps get to that, and it should be passed.
We're back to nature and how complicated she is.
Yes.
And the food chain and how, you know, one creature helps another. So it is very interesting that we've got these three pieces, three types of legislation, I guess 4 bills that we've talked about today. And the road salt is of great concern to me because through our watershed work, we focus a lot on certain types of contaminants that come from non-point sources, that come from our private residences. Mm-hmm. And so we look at pesticides, and we've been educating the public about pesticide and follow the label and please don't overuse. And the same with fertilizers. And I'm sure we can do more work on educating the public on those items, but we haven't really talked about the road salt. And we know that it's become a problem. So we need to address some of these other types of non-point source contaminants that we're not really addressing. So I'm very interested in getting more people to go out and take a look at the waters and do some of the citizen scientist work. Mm-hmm. So the Pequovic River watershed is a sub-regional basin within the Farmington River watershed. And the Farmington River watershed is working with the Isaac Walton Foundation to monitor road salt and chloride in our waters. So at the end of this show, you will see information on how to become a citizen scientist and participate in the Salt Watch program. So I hope that some of you out there watching this show today will get excited about being a citizen scientist and monitor salt in your local stream. You get to do it right in your backyard if you've got a stream there. It's really exciting.
And can I take this opportunity to thank you first for having me, but also for the work that PRWA does. For programs like this are extremely important, these citizen science programs.
Yes.
You can't discount the value that this data has in solving these problems. So thank you very much for promoting that.
Yes, and the thing that I didn't mention is that the data is aggregated, right? It's being aggregated by the Isaac Walton Foundation, and so it gives us a bigger picture.
Yep.
Each little person does their own collection of data, submission of the data, and then, a lot of different decision makers, policy analysts get to see the big picture because the data is all in one spot. So that is something that people can do. It's one of the citizen scientist programs that Farmington River Watershed Association has available for folks. You can go to the farmingtonriverwatershed.org website to find out more about it, and we will also have information at the end of today's show. Alicia, I want to thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And for all the work that you do at the legislature. It's really great.
Thank you.
So thanks for everybody out there watching today. It is Our Environment, Matter of Concern.